One of the most important skills that you can have in business is the ability to communicate effectively. Interestingly, this isn't actually taught properly, neither at school nor in college, where there's focus on literature or creative writing, plot development, and other items in English, but not how do you communicate at work? How do you get the message across? How do you make it short, simple, clear, effective with the audience, effective with the listener, so that you can move and work efficiently? This is especially important in the written context, which is increasingly more and more important with remote work and so forth, whether it's Slack channels or emails and other mediums. In this short course, I will teach you some simple rules that would dramatically improve your ability to communicate at work and therefore be successful. Before we get into the details of how to communicate effectively, I think it's important to understand why there's actually a problem. There's many reasons for this. For example, early in life, right, we're seen as competent when we provide very detailed knowledge about a subject. In school, when we're assigned things to do, usually it's focused about length, not quality. You know, how many people have been told, can you put this in one page? No, it's like, give me 5 pages about this subject. When English is taught, rightfully, the focus of English is about literature and complex words and extending your vocabulary as opposed to being very clear and concise. For many engineers and other folks, early promotion tends to be focused on their expertise in the area, not necessarily on good communication skills. In addition, when you think about how people's natural baseline is about talking about a subject, it's mostly from how they see it, which is pretty normal. However, when you communicate in the business context, it's more important to focus on what the audience sees and how they perceive it. And then finally, when you think about social communication, naturally that's focused on relationship building as opposed to efficient information transfer. These are all good things, but they are actually impediments to communicating clearly in the business context. To clarify what I mean by simple communications, I thought I'd share this example. As you can see, there's 3 different people who are essentially trying to convey the same thing, but obviously in different ways. The first person is just providing you what essentially is an information dump. I'm sure many of you have ran into this problem before. Here's everything I know, and finally at the end, some question. This obviously is very frustrating to the listener because they have to parse out everything and figure out what the person wants. So obviously this is not effective and will probably frustrate the listener if they even bother to listen until the end. The second person is doing a much better job. She's concise, she's specific, and she gets the point. But she can still make it better. If you compare her communication versus the last one, you can see that there's a few issues here. First of all, she's doing what I call a mystery. And what I mean by that is you put the punchline at the end. That may be good for suspense and literature, but we're not doing literature here. We're trying to get things done as soon as possible, and therefore it's important to put the punchline up front. What do I need? I need approval. How much does it cost? Put it up front. The other things he's doing that could be improved is he's sharing various information that isn't that interesting. The fact that it was 6 months ago created by Joe, that's interesting, but it's probably not specific to getting the approval. If you look at the last example, obviously that is the textbook example. Up front, what I need, talks about the numbers, talks about the outcome, gets into the ROI, and talks about the fact that she's got budget for it. This is the way you want to talk about it, right? It's specific, concise, and clear. Often when I talk about clear communications, many people talk about the fact that this is just their style and this is how they communicate. That may be true at a high level, but this is actually a skill you can learn because there's simple steps you can follow. And while there will be differences between different people, if you follow these steps, anybody can learn how to do this well. Like any important mission, in communication, it's really important to start with the end in mind. What is the goal of your communication? Are you trying to get approval for something? Are you trying to educate someone about something? Are you trying to convince them about something? Understand why you're doing the communication. You're not just sending it for no reason. You have better things to do. So what is it you're trying to do? You need to understand what that is, and it needs to be clear in your head, because obviously if it's not clear to you, it's not going to be clear to the audience. Once you understand that, then you can use that actually to measure if you're communicating correctly, as I will show you in the next slides. The most important part of clear communications is understanding that it's actually all about the audience, not about you. It's not about everything you know and want to say about the subject, but rather, what does the listener need to hear to understand your point or for you to achieve your goal? This is super important. You have to focus on the audience. What do they need to hear? What do they care about? It's not about you. Now that we understand that it's all about the audience, the next question, of course, is who is the audience? Obviously, you don't provide the same level of detail to a CEO as you do to an engineer and vice versa. It's not one size fits all. So as part of focusing on the audience, you need to think about, okay, who is this person? Is this a CEO? Do they just need sound bites? Or just an engineer where I need to explain all the details? This is especially important when you're talking to someone who's not at your level. If you're a high level person talking to a detailed person, or if you're an engineer talking to a manager or director. In general, right, and we should remember this, the higher you go, the shorter the communication needs to be because the person typically needs less detail, has less time, and just needs the highlights. Now that we understand that it's all about the audience, and we've now looked at who the audience is, the next important thing obviously is what does this audience care about? What I mean by that is different people can look at different issues from a different perspective based on what they care about. For example, if you're an engineer and you're talking to a business person, while they may be interesting to you to talk about all kinds of technical aspects of the issue, what the business person likely cares more about is how does it impact the business? How long will it take to fix? How much does it cost? Things like that. How does it affect the customer? So unless they specifically ask for, focus on the things they're likely to care about versus the things you care about, right? This is very important to think about, right? Always think about, okay, how does this person approach this subject? Not how you approach the subject, but how do they approach it? Because ultimately, again, it's all about the audience and what they care about. One step that many people fail on is organizing your thoughts in a logical way when you're providing information. Because in your head it might all be straightforward, but many times people just spit out a bunch of different information, not really organized in a way for someone who this information is new or doesn't have the context to understand. And at best case, you may confuse the person, it'll take longer to explain. At worst case, they'll completely misunderstand you. It's like organizing a book, right? It's hard to understand the book if you start in the middle in chapter 10 versus chapter 1. You want things to have a logical sequence. That's how people work. They think in sequence. And so if you're putting things out of sequence, it's going to be hard for them to understand. And you need to remember the audience doesn't have your context. So you need to do it logically. You need to explain to them, we started here, then we're here, then we ended up here. If you just start in the middle, they're not going to know these other steps. One way that I've always told people to resolve this is, just write an outline. Put an outline, write a short outline in your head, a list of things on a piece of paper, and just get the sequence correct. And you can clean it up later in terms of the specifics, but get the sequence right. And think about, hey, when you look at it, would this make sense to somebody who knows nothing about this? And once you have the order straight, then you can clean it up and make it sound better. But just get the order right first, because if you don't have the order right, everything else will be a problem. In general, business communication is not about novels or watching plays or developing a plot. It's about getting the main points as fast as possible to the listener. And what this means is get to the bottom line quickly, okay? Don't build a mystery. There's nothing that frustrates most people more than reading about something and going, okay, what does the person want? Because they're building the background and the reason and understanding and so forth. And start with the bottom line, okay? So whether it's the title of an email, or just your first statements, start with the bottom line. And then you can provide the supporting evidence if it's required. Many times, for example, when someone wants something, instead of just asking for it, they first give, 90 reasons, okay, I exaggerate, but 9 reasons of why this makes sense. That's good to provide, but it may not be necessary. So one way around that is you just say, okay, here is what I want, and then below are a bunch of reasons if you need justification. But you don't start with the justification, you start with the main point, and then you can always provide background information, whether it's background, if the person asks questions that you need to provide, or if it's, background slides, or background, executive summary and more information, but start with the bottom line. I mean, it's extremely frustrating when a person says, okay, what is it that you want, right? What is it? Remember, business communication is about efficiency. It's not about building mysteries. It's not about keeping the reader guessing. It's just about getting information across. So start with the bottom line and have all the supporting information if it's required, but don't force the person to go through all of it just to get to the point. As many of you have probably realized, it's actually easier to write a lot about something than to be very concise. However, again, if it's all about the listener, right, you want to make it easy for them. So while it may take you longer to make things concise, it's going to be much more effective and much more likely to land if you make it short. Now, sometimes it's difficult. You have a lot of information and you're struggling. And so what I suggest in that case is, write out everything you want. And then on top of it, figure out an executive summary. And then worst case, if the executive summary is missing something, the information is at the bottom, but you're not forcing the person, right? So take the time to remove information, superfluous information and so forth. It's possible, but it requires a few iterations. And you got to go through the process. But again, if it's all about the listener, right, you want to save the listener time. Right? There's nothing more frustrating when someone used to send me this, very long email with lots of complexities just to say one point, and I'm like, okay, you didn't want to spend your time figuring out how to make this summary, and so instead of that, you want me to figure that out, right? That's not a winning plan if you need something from the listener. The other thing that I think is important is, by summarizing, you're actually forcing yourself to think logically and working through things, and you're probably going to be a lot more clear and to the point and specific. And so the process itself of doing that is good to make sure that your thinking is straight, and you may find different things that you didn't think about as you're narrowing it down. But this is well worth the time because, again, it's about the audience. Make it easy for the audience. Summarize it, make it less. If you feel that you've lost a bunch of information, you can always provide the details at the bottom. The reader can choose to have them if they want. I promise you, most of the time they won't. From an early age and throughout school and college, we're taught to use sophisticated English, good language, lots of complex words, all kinds of, various statements and things to sound sophisticated. Nothing wrong with that. But if you're trying to land the message and you're trying to make sure that someone understands you, the simpler English you use, the better. And, an old CEO who I used to work for always said, just use 6th grade English. Many times I review things with people and I read this stuff and there's so many complex words, even if I understand them, it's like, what are you trying to say? Why are you adding all these words? How would you speak to me? If you spoke to me, if you just said something to me, would you use these words in normal conversation? So, while it may seem counterintuitive, right, use simple English if you want to get the message across, because complex words are just filling up space. They may confuse the reader. The reader may just ignore it and think, oh, this is all fluff, marketing fluff. And so it's going to come out as inauthentic. It's going to come out as corporate speak. And that's really not what you want to get across anyways, because the minute a person thinks it's corporate speak, they just ignore it. So again, if you're struggling with that, think about, okay, if you were going to talk to your wife or your friend or someone, how would you convey this? How would you say it just in language, in conversation versus, oh, let me write these sophisticated words? Trust me, it's much more effective. It's important to remember that when you're in written communication, right, the primary goal is to make the information as straightforward and as easy as possible for the reader to understand. Okay? And obviously, if you think about describing something, if you break it down into an outline, even if it's not going to win any literary awards, it's much easier to read. I mean, tell me, when's the last time when you sent an outline to someone, which may not have been perfect, in terms of all the English, but sort of said, okay, we need to do boom, 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 boom. And they sent you back an email and said, oh, no, I would like this in a paragraph. So I have to go sort through it, right? Outlines are always easier to understand. And when you're talking about transferring information, not about poetry awards, not about literature awards, it's much easier. And so I always suggest this to people, and I do it myself a lot. If you've got a bunch of information, break it down. It's easier to read. It's more logical. It's just simpler. And just break it down. Like, okay, we have 4 things we need to think about. Boom, boom, boom. Or we need to go through these steps. There's nothing that frustrates me and many other executives when they're trying to summarize and go through things quickly would probably frustrate you as well, is to start trying to figure it out and then creating my own outline. Just put it in an outline. It's not about, literary words. It's also easier because you probably, by putting it in the outline, you can order it logically and make sure it's structured correctly, which is something you need to do anyway. Again, the goal is to make the information as easy as possible to understand. Outlines are easier to write, easier to understand, right? So simple tool works every time. In the spirit of simplicity, I've given you here a simple example to remember. I stole this from someone else who was talking about simplicity. Those of you who haven't seen this movie, it's The Princess Bride. If you have seen it, this should make it very easy for you to remember, because this guy goes around saying this in every situation until he finally finds the guy. And if you haven't seen it, go see it as soon as possible, because it's an amazing movie. But again, very simple English, structured discussion in an outline, get to the point right away, no mysteries. Hope this short lesson on better communication was helpful for you, and you can leverage it to continue improving. And if you have any comments or other suggestions or questions, feel free to send me email at the email below. Thank you.